This series covers the Anglo-American War on Russia since 1918 that didn't stop when the Soviet Union disbanded. Europeans assumed that Russia would be welcomed into the European Union and possibly NATO. The United States blocked these attempts because it needed a villain to justify NATO expansion. It also wanted to break up the powerful Russian Federation so that it could never challenge the American empire again, nor protect its vast natural resources from foreign control. The Russian Federation consists of 22 republics where Washington supports secessionist movements with the goal of destabilizing and ultimately dismantling Russia. This succeeded after the Cold War ended by installing alcoholic Boris Yeltsin as president. He agreed to quickly privatize Russia's economy with promises the West would help with the painful transition. Professor Jeffrey Sachs from Columbia University proposed a rapid privatization plan nearly identical to that implemented in Poland. He was dismayed to discover that neocons still considered Russia an enemy.
You know, I believed in President Gorbachev's vision of a common European home that would stretch from Rotterdam actually to Vladivostok, as he put it. I think that was the right vision then. I continue to believe in open global cooperation, of course, including China, including Africa, including Latin America. So all of my economic advice has been based on the idea of peaceful cooperation and an open world that gives space for countries either to overcome historical burdens that they faced, to make up for lost time, to recover from financial crises, and so on. In 1989, I became advisor to the Polish government and the Solidarity movement as that country was transitioning from the Soviet system to a market and democratic system. And I advised on how Poland could reconnect with Europe. And indeed, the slogan of the Polish Solidarity movement was the return to Europe. So I recommended how to make the currency convertible, how to create stability, how to reduce the debt burdens that were inherited from the Soviet period, and so forth. It was quite successful. And on that basis, President Gorbachev asked me to work with his economic team, led by Gregory Yavlinsky at the time, and I tried to help them. And then after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, President Yeltsin asked me to work with Yegor Gaidar, his economic advisor and acting prime minister, in fact, to help. Now, the big point that I would make is that when I advised Poland, I made several recommendations to help Poland overcome a deep financial crisis, cancel Poland's debts, create a special fund to stabilize the currency, and so forth. These proved to be, first, they were adopted by the White House very quickly, my ideas, sometimes within a few hours. Second, they proved to be quite successful in stabilizing a collapsed economy. But when I made the same recommendations for Gorbachev's reforms, they were turned down completely without any iota of support. The White House said, hell no, we're not supporting the Soviet Union. And then when I made similar recommendations on how to stabilize the Russian situation in early 1992, which was also very, very difficult financially, a complete flat rejection. And I said to senior US officials, but it worked in Poland. They told me it doesn't matter if it worked in Poland. This is different. Basically, the U.S. was already on the course of unipolarity, which is not my cup of tea at all. They said, why should we help these guys? They're our enemies.
Economist Michael Hudson explained the plan to destroy the Russian economy.
The American nightmare, Brzezinski wrote, was that Russia would get together with Germany and with Western Europe, creating Russian raw materials, German industry, and somehow, finally, Russia would become westernized. America, under Brzezinski's strategy, said this would be a disaster because if Russia's westernized, if it becomes democratic, if Europe and Russia are prosperous, then we cannot control them anymore, and they will have no reason to be NATO. We've got to stop Russia and the...
Former U.S. Defense Secretary Robert Gates wrote that Vice President Richard Cheney wanted Russia destroyed. In his book, he wrote, quote, "When the Soviet Union was collapsing in late 1991, Dick wanted to see the dismantlement not only of the Soviet Union and the Russian Empire, but Russia itself, so it could never again be a threat." End quote. The small Russian Republic of Chechnya was targeted for a Muslim revolution. Chechen terrorists were funded by the American CIA and killed hundreds of Russians. Russian security services published evidence that the United States supported Chechen separatists in their war on the central Russian government. British academic John Laughlin stressed in a 2004 article in The Guardian titled "The Chechens' American Friends" that several Chechen secessionist leaders were living in the West and were even given grant money by the U.S. government. He noted that the most important U.S.-based pro-Chechen secessionist group, the deceptively named American Committee for Peace in Chechnya, members included the most prominent American neocons. See the two articles linked below in the description. When American film director Oliver Stone interviewed Russian President Vladimir Putin, he explained his shock to learn the Americans were supporting terrorism in Russia. There was little American public support for the neocon effort to conquer the world. A massive propaganda effort began to demonize Russia and convince Americans that Russia was a threat. The neocon Democratic Party machine, led by Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden, teamed up with the corrupt American intelligence community to promote absurd lies about a Russian threat. This was rejected by Donald Trump, who openly opposed building up forces in Europe and confronting Russia. Most Americans agreed, and this was one reason Trump won the 2016 presidential election. As a result, an absurd effort began to convince Americans that Trump was a Russian agent and that Russia had interfered in the election. This led to a decade of warmongering lies that became known as Russiagate. These lies were gradually debunked by independent media, especially after the recent release of the Twitter files. Many Americans still believe these lies, so I link 3 videos in the description to cleanse minds of a decade of absurd anti-Russia propaganda. The 1997 Founding Act Agreement between NATO and Russia prohibited new military bases in Europe and the stationing of new forces. The United States ignored this written agreement and constructed 10 new military bases in Poland. In 2017, construction of a massive logistics hub began in central Poland. That was the largest new NATO base in 30 years and would house 2,700 American armored vehicles.
In the port city of Bremerhaven on Germany's North Sea coast, approximately 4,000 American troops and 2,500 vehicles began arriving in early January. Known as the Iron Brigade, they're from the Army's 3rd Armored Brigade Combat Team of the 4th Infantry Division, based in Fort Carson, Colorado. This is the largest deployment of U.S. forces in Europe since the end of the Cold War, 25 years ago. It's part of the European Reassurance Initiative and Operation Atlantic Resolve, a $3.5 billion effort paid for by the United States to reinforce NATO.
In 2019, a virtual war in Russia was openly declared with a report published by the RAND Corporation, a major Pentagon-backed think tank, titled overextending and unbalancing Russia. It recommends dozens of actions to weaken Russia. This provocative study was funded by the U.S. Army. It was assumed this was an accidental release of a secret report, yet it remained available online for the world to see and can be read at the link below. Nearly all these recommendations to weaken and destabilize Russia were implemented over the next 4 years, causing much violence and bloodshed. In a December 2022 speech to the people of Russia, President Vladimir Putin explained how the United States has worked to destroy Russia since the end of the Cold War.
Уже не раз говорил и даже писал в своих статьях, у наших стратегических противников стоит цель дезинтеграции и ослабления, разобщения нашей страны. На протяжении веков ничего нового здесь нет. Слишком большая, как им кажется, страна, представляющая угрозу для кого-то, поэтому ее нужно немножко почикать, раздробить. А мы со своей стороны всегда, почти всегда придерживались совершенно другого подхода, других установок. Мы всегда хотели быть частью вот этого так называемого цивилизованного мира. И вот после развала Советского Союза, который мы допустили своими собственными руками, нам почему-то казалось, что вот со дня на день мы станем частью этого так называемого цивилизованного мира. А как выяснилось, нас там не ждали. Несмотря на все наши усилия и попытки, говорю это и имея в виду свою работу, я тоже предпринимал эти попытки. Наши попытки сблизиться, стать этой частью, нет. Наоборот, были предприняты другие действия, в том числе с использованием международных террористов на Кавказе для того, чтобы добить и Россию, растащить и вновь созданную Российскую Федерацию.